Great. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Helen Barefoot from the University of Hertfordshire. I'm Director for Education here, and with my colleague Sarah.
Hello, everybody. My name's Sarah Flynn. I'm Deputy Director for Education here at the University of Hertfordshire.
And we've been working on this project since last year, almost a year now, isn't it?
Yeah.
Since we applied and got the funding. And so this is one of our workshops about leadership in action. So hopefully within this session, we'll reflect on how leadership might be different at various stages of your career, to identify useful staff development to support confidence in leadership, and to hear about leadership in action and the examples that we will share of our leadership journeys. Now, again, we're using Mentimeter, so at a certain point, we'll ask you to join the Mentimeter to contribute some thoughts. But before we do that, let's just a very brief reminder of the overarching project. So this project is funded by the British Council. It's a collaboration between the University of Hertfordshire, HUTECH, Thap Community College and Dongay University. And as well as coming out to do some face-to-face workshops that Sarah and I did in June, we're also doing these monthly online workshops. Throughout the project as well, we've developed the massive open online course, the MOOC, and we're hoping to have 1,000 participants enrolled on the course. And we hope you find, those of you who already been through the course, we hope you find the materials really useful. If you haven't yet joined, please do enroll on the online course, as we think you'll find lots of the materials and resources useful for you. And that's been materials produced by the University of Hertfordshire and by HUTECH and colleagues. Then, of course, we've got these online workshops that are taking place on a monthly basis. And again, these are in partnership with our colleagues in Vietnam, but also as well, we're introducing you to different colleagues from around the University of Hertfordshire and also some other colleagues at other institutions. We're hoping as well at some point to try and establish a little bit of a female scientist network. That's proving a little more challenging, but it is part of what we're aiming to do. And of course, we're using social media to communicate the activities and promote the project. So as I mentioned, we've had these monthly workshops and we've got all the recordings. So if you haven't been able to join us for previous workshops, then you can access those recordings as well. But this one, as we mentioned, is in Leadership in Action. Our next one then is in February, where we're talking about career development, and also one in March about evaluating your learning and next steps. Within the massive open online course, you can join this. The link is on the slides here, but we can send that out to participants afterwards. But you register onto the online course and you can work through the materials in the different sections. So let's talk about leadership in action.
Yes, sounds great.
Our first thing for you to do is to join our Mentimeter if you can. So if you can use the QR code that's on the screen, and you'll be asked to join menti.com. You can join it directly, menti.com, and using the code 89037392. But it's probably easier with the QR code. But like I say, if you want to, you can go directly to menti.com and you can join the presentation. I can see one person has joined, which
It's always good to see the first one join.
check the link's working.
Great to see people joining. Please feel free. We would normally say to type in English or in Vietnamese. One of our colleagues from Hertfordshire is normally with us for this session, who would do our live translation for us. But I think Kim not available for this session. So Myung, you may be asked to do some live translation if colleagues want to contribute.
Sure. Yeah, sure.
But we would love for you to tell us a little bit about what leaders do in your organisation. And you might want to think about your most senior leaders, or you might want to think about local leaders, people who are managers, perhaps in your department or in your area. And you can tell us a little bit about what they do, because we're interested in knowing what it is about their practice that stays in your mind. We'll just wait for a few contributions to come.
So for people, if they've just joined,
Yes,
please do.
you see one Vietnamese sentence, right? The Vietnamese sentence mean that the leaders will give us some task and they will check if the task is finished or not.
Good.
Yeah.
So setting some activities, checking up if
Yes.
we've done them well. Good. If people have just joined us, you can see we're sharing a screen and we've got a QR code on that screen. It's to join our Mentimeter. So please do join that chat so you can contribute to the discussion. You can use the QR code or you can join via menti.com and it'll ask you for a code, and that code is 89037392 as shown at the top of the slide. So any other thoughts on what leaders do in your organisation? We've got one about assigning tasks and then checking if that work's done. Our second one as well, assigning tasks, responding to administrative issues and mitigating relational matters. I think that is important. How do you manage those personal relationships in the professional workplace? How do you manage issues that might come up with staff members? They have a list of tasks to give us. So there's a definite idea about the workload setting and workload management for colleagues that they lead.
That's a really interesting word to use, isn't it? Because often here in the UK, we talk about leaders and managers and recognise that some people can be both at the same time. And we recognise that managers are often people responsible for the day-to-day task allocation and checking of that work is happening and that people are attending work and doing their duties. And sometimes we talk about leaders as being something a little bit different, maybe a little bit more removed. And the tasks that they give might be a little bit more strategic or longer term tasks, things that might contribute towards goals or objectives rather than perhaps day-to-day activities. And it's always a big debate here in any leadership or management education spaces here in the UK about what the divide is. Because often people get management experience and then want to step up into being more senior leaders. And we'll talk a little bit in this workshop about what it might look like at different stages of your career.
We've got another one, again, capturing some of those management activities, assigning tasks and managing the staff. But there's that leading the team and making sure all members cooperate. So how do we facilitate a really effective team culture? Great. So we were thinking, what do leaders do in academia? We were thinking that they define the vision. And just as Sarah said, that's strategic overview. How do they work with others to articulate and define the vision for the university or for their department? And alongside that vision then is how do they develop and implement a strategy to play out to enable us to meet that vision? So again, working with others to develop and implement strategy and strategic objectives to meet the overarching vision. I think leaders as well, again, there's a more management activity, but they would oversee finances and operations. So that managerial side of their leadership role. And again, also within that management, the people management. And that might be a small group of people that they manage, or it might be that they have responsibility for a large group of people that they don't directly line manage, but they are responsible for and accountable for. So a head of department might be responsible for 50 members of staff.
I really liked the comment that came in the Menti before about looking after working relationships, because that's a big part of people management. And even the most senior leaders in an organisation can do what we would refer to as set the tone. They can establish the culture of how people will be managed within an organisation. So whilst they might only be directly managing a few people, they are, as the senior leader in an organisation, responsible for showing the way in which they want all of the managers and leaders within their organisation to work.
Yeah, such an important point. We might also talk about their role external to the university. So working with partner institutions and partner organisations, that might be colleges they're connected with, it might be international partner institutions, it might be, in our situation, working with partner institutions on a specific research project. They may also be involved in the external representation of their institution or their department. So going to external events, representing the university, representing their subject area, for example, in disciplinary meetings that are held outside of the university.
Yeah, they're often really important at the earlier stages of one's career, because you can find yourself rather junior member of staff within your institution, but actually engaging with subject groups, disciplinary groups, there's often less hierarchy in those spaces, and so a really good opportunity to engage in activities.
I think perhaps these last two are, again, for people who are in senior leadership roles. So understanding that they might be involved in crisis management. So, for example, when COVID hit the university, who were the decision makers about how the university was going to respond to the COVID pandemic? Who was going to be the director of how we're going to move all the teaching online, how we're going to move all the assessment online, when people were going to be in the university or allowed back in? The decision makers in those crisis situations, and knowing how and when to communicate effectively and to manage those very, very difficult situations. So crisis management, I would say, is particularly a senior leadership role, and something people might do perhaps later on in their career as they progress within their leadership activities. And also as well, change management. So making decisions within an institution or within a department to change structures or to change processes, perhaps to close a department. That might be a very difficult decision. And how do you manage that change? How do you work with staff? So there is going to be disruption, there is going to be upset, but how do you communicate? How do you consult with people to try and make that change as smooth as is possible?
Definitely. I think those last two often feature quite heavily in people's stories about their own leadership development. Yeah. And there might be some time to come back later to a couple of examples that we've dealt with over the years that very much stay in your memory.
So those are some of the things that leaders might do. We've talked previously within these workshops about the skills that we might have as leaders. So we're not going to go through these, but these skills you might apply throughout all different stages of your career. But those activities that leaders do might be slightly different at different stages of your career. So like we said, that crisis management, that change management might be something you do when you're a very, very experienced leader, not when you're first in a leadership role. But when you are in a whether that's at the beginning of a leadership role or as a very experienced leader, you almost certainly will be motivating others. You'll be thinking about team building. You'll be giving and receiving feedback from others. Likely, you'll be thinking strategically. That might be in a smaller area. You're leading your small team. How is your small team going to work strategically? Or in a later, more experienced role, it might be about how you are leading and thinking strategically for the department or the institution. Hopefully as well, throughout that period, whether it's you as a new leader or as an experienced leader, you'll be inspiring trust within the people that you work with and really fostering the potential of those colleagues that you're working with. Again, you've mentioned about setting tasks. So that's setting goals and expectations and checking up with people how they're getting on with those activities is going to be important. I think we talk as well about trying to be an authentic leader throughout our experience, whether that's at the beginning of your career, in the middle of your career, or towards the end as a very experienced leader, maintaining your authentic self. And that can feel quite difficult. We'll talk about why that might be challenging at different times, but it is something that's really important. And again, particularly for women, to be really comfortable in themselves as leaders and being authentic as themselves, not having to pretend to be a very strong or masculinized perception of leadership, the powerful leader. That is not going to be helpful. It's about being authentic to ourselves and sharing a little bit of who we are in how we work with our colleagues.
Definitely. There's certainly trends in the UK, probably parts of Western Europe and certainly North America in management and leadership training, probably up until about 10 years ago, really, where it was still very much about being in as Helen said, those kind of skills and traits which are words associated with strength or often ascribed to men. In the research, it will talk to you about different language that is used to describe particular leaders, and they've often been sort of strong, confident, visionary, and actually in the more recent research and thankfully through into leadership development programs now, we see the value of leaders who listen, who are consulting, who are collaborative, who recognise the diversity in their organisation. And whilst neither of those things are exclusively about men or about women, what they recognise is actually it's about the person that is stepping into the leadership role, and hence that authenticity being really important, to be able to be confident of the skills and experience that you bring and how they shape your leadership style.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. So, coming back to Mentimeter, hopefully you can add a thought in for here as well. So, who do you currently lead at work? Are you in a leadership role? Do you have a team that you lead? So who do you lead? That might be module leaders, that might be a team that are working on a particular project, that might be a research group. So who do you lead? And again, you should be able to type in. Please do type in Vietnamese if easier for you, and we'll ask Nung to translate for us.
Someone said that Mentimeter not active, so can you check for the Mentimeter?
It does seem to be working because we've got some people in the room and checking there.
So can you send the QR code again into the chat box or the link?
So the link we can
type that.
What happens on the screen is that like we need to wait for the presenter to change the slides. So it says on the screen that we need to wait for the presenter to change the slide.
Let me go back then. Let me try one more. Is it come up now?
It works now.
Oh, good. There we go.
Excellent. Maybe it is like here in the UK, we are nearly at the end of our teaching term. So, and we use Mentimeter a lot here. So maybe Mentimeter is tired because it's the end of term.
Had enough work.
So we use it a lot in our teaching and our workshop activities. And so we like to use it, and it gives people an opportunity to contribute if they are not confident to speak up in teaching sessions, or if we indeed have a lot of people, because it gives a really clear visual way to see people's contributions. We can also see the chat window, so if that's important for you, then please feel free to take a look at that as well, if that would work. But interesting. I love the fact that we can see already that we recognise that we lead staff, but we might also lead students as well. And we had some really interesting conversations in our last but one workshop, I think, or our last workshop, about being an active researcher and about the role of leading laboratory teams, particularly where we have a mixture of current students, of doctoral students, postdoctoral students working alongside colleagues, and what that means to lead work. One of our colleagues on the project, Dr. Maria Dimitradi, was talking about setting up her research laboratory in that sense. So absolutely great that we recognise that it's not always just colleagues and staff that we're leading.
That's right. And also colleagues in different roles. So that might be leading technical members of staff. It might be working with professional teams. It might be working with academic staff. So again, and that certainly requires different objectives, but it might also require different ideas and thoughts in terms of the vision, the work allocation for those people in different roles. So we can see there.
You can see one Vietnamese sentence, and that Vietnamese sentence is for this one here. They have a small working group with 3 staff, and she or he may the one who lead that small group.
Great, lovely. And someone has said there is a faculty dean, they oversee the work of fellow lecturers and the admin staff within their faculty. Again, so quite a large area of responsibility, a bigger group there. And then also another team, admin staff, teachers, instructors and students.
I'm really interested in the couple of you who say that you don't lead anybody at work. And I think this is one of the distinctions between leaders and managers. I think managers is a role you are given, and leaders sometimes is a role you're given, but sometimes you lead people without knowing it and without it being a job that is given to you. And I think the colleague who's contributed the idea of leading a working group often speaks to getting people on board with your ideas and working together with you, even when you don't manage them or you don't have any authority or oversight over them. And we often talk about, on a really basic level, the leadership role that our teaching staff have here at the university towards their students. We call it role modelling, and we recognise that in that setting, students will look up to their faculty, to their teaching staff, and whether that member of staff intends it or not, they are being modelled as a leader to those students. So their behaviour, their actions, and the way in which they interact with their colleagues and the students are all being observed by their own students. And that's a different sort of leadership, but it's a leadership that happens anyway.
Yeah. And we sometimes talk about that leadership without authority. So that leadership where you don't have line management of individual staff, yet your behaviours influence others. And so how do you role model effective behaviours? How do you set the right tone, encourage staff? Even if you don't line manage them, you're working with them and supporting them in an informal way to help the benefit of the institution. So thinking about that leading, we would talk about it as leading without authority. So let's go on to our next slide. And again, just asking how many people you lead. So how many people are there in the team that you lead? And again, this might vary. You might
recognise I haven't got a zero in here. Apologies for that, everybody. But
0 to 6. So
yeah, let's go 0 to 6. So if you don't currently lead anyone at the moment, feel free to pick the up to 6 option. That's fine. I always reflect on my first job where I was asked to manage staff. It wasn't in a university, but I went from being a member of the team to being asked to lead a team of about 35. And it was the difference between going into work in one setting one week and then coming the next week and all of a sudden it was completely different.
Yeah.
And it was definitely I think we use the expression, a roller coaster of experience. It was really exciting, terrifying.
Yeah.
Lots to learn whilst I was in the job. But yeah, it's amazing when you think about the sizes of some of the teams that people have to manage, sometimes quite early on in their careers.
And also as well, that challenge of you've been part of the team and then you are managing the same people.
Yeah.
And that's a challenging situation sometimes. And how people see you differently, but also, again, trying to maintain that authenticity, but recognizing you have a different role and responsibility.
Definitely.
And again, as we talked about there, that might be sometimes perhaps a little bit more challenging for women.
Yeah.
Particularly in terms of how other people might perceive them, having been previously a member of the team and now the leader of the team.
Definitely.
Great. So we can see we've got some variability in the sizes that people lead. And again, I don't think it's easier to lead a small team compared to a big team. I think it's just a different approach that we think about in who we lead and how we lead. But importantly, as we've mentioned as well, about setting the tone and that culture, whether it's a very small team or a really large team.
There's a really lovely comment in the chat about the makeup of the teams that you manage and that how it might be easier to understand people if you're from the same or similar backgrounds, and realizing that it might be different if you're working with a much more multicultural team. That's certainly a factor of leadership here in the UK. We would often find that we'll be working with colleagues from lots of different backgrounds across our teams. Sometimes that's really a good learning opportunity for everyone. It adds a real level of diversity. We have a very diverse team here at Hertfordshire in the team that Helen and I lead, and they've had a wide variety of experiences. We were really pleased to draw on that, actually, because we have a colleague in our team who works with us here in the UK, who is from South Africa, but spent many years working in Vietnam. So we were able to speak to him before we came out to Vietnam to talk about his experiences of working in that. We also have a colleague in our team of Vietnamese heritage as well. So it is a real joy for us to work with diverse teams. But I absolutely recognise that it can create a real shortcut if you've got people with shared experience. That creates some potential limitations to the team if you are all very similar. We often joke, and this in our university, and this was the same when we travelled to Vietnam, that Helen and I often end up in the same meetings at the university, and people call us by each other's names. They often mix us up or treat us as if we are the same person or interchangeable. And that's because in many situations, we do think, work and act quite similarly, but we recognise that, and we recognise that sometimes that means that we might be not doing something that someone who is a little bit different to us would suggest. So having that awareness where you've got a lot of similarity in your team that you lead is really important, so that you don't have those missed opportunities.
Yeah, and I think it's important as well where you have got, and we would say it's a real positive to have people from lots of different backgrounds and experiences, and how you share those different experiences and understand people's different backgrounds and learning a little bit about their previous experiences and their culture is really important. And then to celebrate those things, particularly around food or around discussions, I think it's really positive. So again, thinking about your staff, thinking about who you work with and trying to understand their experiences and their backgrounds will really help in that leadership role.
Definitely. So it's really helpful to find out a little bit about the teams that you lead. We're going to move into thinking about how you develop your leadership identity at different times during your career. So here we're interested about what stage of your career you feel that you're at. Now, this is always a controversial one, to put labels on things with numbers of years. And there may be people on the call who've had a big career change. We certainly experienced that in our team. We have a colleague within our team who's been with us, I think, about 2.5 years now, but used to work with young children in schools and decided that they wanted to move into a very different sphere of education, made a significant career change. So whilst she might be described as being well established because she's been working for more than 10 years. I think she would use the language of being early career, of working in higher education. So we're interested to know what stage of your career you feel that you're at. And hopefully that slide's able to work. I can see it works for a couple of you. And if not, again, as I say, we have the chat window open. So if you'd like to put anything in there. One of the reasons why we talk about this, and we'll go on to give some more examples in a moment, is that your experiences at different stages of your career can be different. But as we've mentioned already earlier on in our workshop, often the way in which you feel about becoming a leader can be different at different stages of your career. It's really common at the beginning of when you're asked to step into management and leading roles that you feel you have to adopt particular behaviours and patterns that may not feel natural or authentic to you, but they may be what you think of as something that a leader has to do. And it may well be, actually, from your organisation, these are tasks or a culture that you are asked to fulfill in those roles. And as you move through your career, that might change a little bit more.
Comes put in the chat, regardless of our leadership experience, new issues keep emerging. That's absolutely true. I don't think there's every day when something different doesn't come up. Yeah. But I think that second part of that, the experience does help. And I think that's right. Experience helps us to deal with the new issues and challenges that might be coming. And you might feel more confident in dealing with those challenges because you've got a period of experience behind you.
Helen is well known in our organisation for saying 2 words. She says, always learning. And I think that that's really true in the leadership space as well. My professional area of expertise is experiential learning. So you would absolutely expect me to agree with you completely that as we collect experiences through our lives, they help us to deal with the new challenges, and we can apply what we've learned from those previous experiences to those new experiences that we're having. Really interesting to see resilience appear in the chat as well. There's lots of talk about resilience in leadership, particularly in some of the women in leadership courses that are available in the UK. And I have to say, it's something that's been quite popular and prominent for a while, and is starting almost to maybe be less of a positive sentiment. I think it's now starting to say that resilience is a response to continuous stress. And actually, as leaders, we have to take our responsibility in looking at doing what we can to reduce the stress, not require our leaders and our staff to be more resilient. But I prefer a more everyday description of resilience, if you like, that things in life knock you down, and the important thing is how you get up and carry on again. And I think that some of our most successful role models that we've had over time in leadership, certainly myself, when I think about the leaders that I've worked with and for that I admire, I think that sense of resilience, a sense of if you go down one path and it stops, that they're very good at finding an alternative way, or that if something that's really positive but it finishes, you embrace the new opportunity and you make the most out of that. So I think that's my take on resilience that I'd like to offer to you. So we're going to think a little bit about how leadership identity changes at different times during your career. And we're speaking in really broad terms between early, mid and late career here. And this is some nice research from Laura Koritz, who has done quite a lot of interview-based work with leaders at different stages of their careers, and talks about the kinds of characteristics or activities that we might typically do in each of those stages. So when we're in the early phases of our career, it's a really intense period of learning. So we find that that's an opportunity where we might experiment a bit, we're learning different ways of doing things, but that we also find a need to prove ourselves. We need to repay that trust in our leaders who have put us into that position of leadership. Often we have to prove to be adaptable and change what we're doing because we're learning, we're trying out new things, and we're sort of working out what kind of leader we want to become. That identity is forming in that stage. When we're a little bit more into our career, we become more established. We've kind of done some of that learning, not that it ever finishes, but we've worked out what we're maybe good at, what we're maybe a bit more comfortable, and we're starting to feel a little bit more that we can really project to other people the kind of leader that we want to be. Often in the middle of your career, you can become quite a specialised leader. So you might become an associate head of a department, or moving into more senior leadership roles, something associated with your discipline, a bit like the research workshop that we had recently, thinking about, you might be very specialised in terms of your research, running a laboratory, that kind of thing. So you might be developing a reputation for the specialisms that you have at that point in your career.
That might be something like academic quality, or working with partners and understanding partnership working. So it might be within that higher education sphere, but moving into a specialism that, again, Sarah said, you get a reputation for. Oh, Helen's got a really good understanding of the academic quality issues, or Sarah's got really good relationships with the different partner institutions, has worked and understands their needs, and also understands what we can learn from those partner institutions.
Definitely. And I think this is where you can start to see the impact of your leadership in a much more in a much more meaningful way. So often in our early career, I think the impact of your leadership that you start to see is on your colleagues. You can start to see how you're working with that team management and so on. And as you get more established in your mid-career, you're getting a sense of the impact that you have. And as Helen said, your reputation is starting to develop there. People will seek you out for your specialist knowledge, or they will know when a new project comes up, oh, we need to get Helen in on that project because this is what she did last time and it worked really well. So you can get that sense of impact coming through. Later on in your career, you can often maybe step away from some of the more day-to-day managerial aspects of leadership, and you're stepping into a space that might make you more of a mentor to people. You might be seen as a role model, as someone who inspires others. People want to understand your journey and want to learn from your experiences in terms of supporting their own development. I think when you get to your late career, and we're certainly working with a few colleagues like this at the moment, you become really aware of the legacy that you're leaving behind if you're getting to the end of your working time, either at that institution or in terms of your actual career because you're going to retire. So one of our colleagues who is on the MOOC, our Deputy Vice-Chancellor, Mary Watson, spoke beautifully about some of the work that she's done over the years and the changes that she wants to make. She's got always somebody who's got a really strong vision of what she wants to achieve and a clear goal in mind. And we're sad but thrilled for her that she's recently secured a promotion. So she'll be leaving our university at the end of the year, but she is going on to, if you like, the ultimate leadership job in higher education. She's going to become the principal of a Scottish university, so the most senior leader in that organisation. But she has been really conscious of the legacy that she wants to leave here at Hertfordshire. She would talk about that she led a very big curriculum transformation project. She's done a lot of work around academic workloading and management, and she's done a huge amount of work in a change management project in reorganising part of our university that is going to house our new medical school. So being legacy aware doesn't necessarily mean before I stop working, I want everybody, this is the thing I want everybody to remember me for. But it might be about what is the thing that I want to remain in place when I step away from this job. But also in that late career phase, I think there often becomes more of a confidence to lean into having a good work-life balance because you're not feeling as much need to prove yourself, which is very common in an early career. There is also an expression in the literature that we talk about a lot, that the literature talks about a lot, rather, which is controversial. Some people don't like it, but it's an expression known as imposter syndrome. And it's something that is totally normal, can affect everybody, doesn't only affect women, but that we can often step into a role when we don't really feel fully ready for it. I know there's certainly been times in my career when I turned around and I thought, what idiot thought it was a good idea for me to be in charge of this? And then you stop, you take wise counsel from your colleagues and your friends around you. You look back at your experiences and you think, no, actually, I do have the skills and knowledge. Just because I haven't done this before, what I need to do is apply my knowledge and my skills from my previous roles to this new situation. And I think that it's been really refreshing, I would say, in the last sort of 10 years of leadership development space that people talk about it much more overtly.
I've lost my mouse. Give me a second.
I'm just having a quick look as well. I like I can see in the chat the responsibility for creating a positive, welcoming, respectful and supportive environment. And I think that's really nice. It's interesting, actually, in the Corrett's literature, there isn't a lot about workplace culture and the role that leaders take in setting that. But we certainly know from the team that we lead here at our university that the positive feedback that we get about our team often speaks to the amount of time and energy that we and the managers and leaders that work in our team put into trying to creating that personalised and positive culture for our colleagues that go along.
You know, also excuse me. And Ms. asked, what do you think about established leaders who keep challenging their subordinates rather than inspiring and role modeling them? I think that's a real problem. I think you want to create that positive work culture. If people trust you, they will want to do well for you. That's how I've always felt. If you have a good working relationship with your colleagues, they will want to do things well. They will want to achieve well. So I certainly never want to be in a situation where I've created a negative environment, where I've created a blame environment, because ultimately that leads to people being unhappy. And if they're unhappy, they'll either leave or they'll go off sick. And then the work doesn't get done. So you just end up in a negative spiral, and the work still doesn't get done. So for me, that is about creating that positive environment, building that relationship, being clear about the expectations and how we're going to evaluate the objectives that we're working towards, but that they are shared objectives. And that if someone is struggling and they're feeling it difficult, how can I help them to then meet those objectives?
Yeah, I think it is, whilst as you'll hear, we try very hard to orientate work in that setting, but we can't ignore the fact that often probably in early and mid-career leadership, or even in later on, you do sometimes get involved in working with colleagues or teams who are not performing well. And I think that can be a challenging part of leadership, and maybe one of the stories that we'll tell later on. Certainly I would say in a mid-career for me, I stepped into a leadership role in one of our faculties that was in a very negative space in terms of the culture. And I was given a remit to challenge, as to use your words, to challenge the subordinates to get into line. And my starting point was, that language is not going to be helpful in solving this problem. So we'll maybe share a little bit more about that in a moment.
I also think that comment's really interesting about leaders who keep challenging their subordinates. I think as well, there's an important thing about how do you manage up. So if you've got a leader who is challenging you and in a very negative way, how do you gently push back or manage that situation so it turns it around into a positive? And that can be really difficult, but we would talk about as managing upwards. And that is an important part of leadership as well, that being confident. And again, it comes in that when perhaps in your mid-career, when you feel a little bit more established, when you're very aware of your own skills and your expertise, that you then have that confidence to actually push back a little bit and say, no, that's not appropriate, or no, the evidence suggests that wouldn't be effective. That you're using your expertise, you're using evidence-informed approaches to actually challenge upwards. I think that is important as well.
It is. I think some challenge is always important. She says, being acutely aware of, let me think about, Helen is my manager, for example, and she knows me very well. And she knows when I will dodge doing something that is difficult or uncomfortable, and she will hold me accountable for that. She will say, don't you think you should do this? She has a great expression. She says, you don't have to, but it would be really good if you thought about, which I know means you need to do this. And so I think an element of challenge in the sense of helping get the most from your team is important. But if we think about challenge in a confrontational sense, I think that rarely leads to success in leadership, to be honest. So let's think about some early career experiences. So these are often the first times where you've had to spend your working time thinking not about what you do, but thinking more about what the team does in it. And I think here we use the word developing really often because it is very much a process of evolution, a process of learning. So that's about understanding, getting to know your team, but also understanding how good teams work. I think sometimes you have been privileged to be part of a good team, but you don't necessarily understand what makes it a good team. Most of the time, if you've been part of a badly functioning team, it's much more obvious what isn't working in that space. So seeing that as a time to learn what it is that makes good teams work and function, and some of the things that we were just talking about, positive environment, trust, clear expectations,
sharing experiences,
sharing and respecting each other's experiences, because often people have different things to offer in that space, but also having a clear vision about what you're trying to achieve as a team is important. And I think that, yes, that's absolutely critical to getting the most from your staff.
Can I say one thing as well?
Go
I mean,
for it.
when we were in Vietnam, what was really nice was that people ate lunch together. And that's something we try and do within our team. Is people are busy, but we always try and say, oh, I'm stopping now to eat lunch, shall we eat together? And that enables that informal learning, enables that informal discussion, enables that shared experience. But we don't do it in a very formal way, or we don't, it's only, I'm going to stop, are you going to stop? Whereas we really liked that in Vietnam, that people really focused on that, ate together, spoke together and worked together. And that was an important element of it. And I think that really does help in that building your team and understanding how your team can work together effectively.
It's an unhealthy part of UK higher education culture. It's very unusual for teams to stop and take a full lunch break, and B, to sit and eat together, to the extent that we've often talked about sitting together and sharing food. So whether that's lunch or making sure that we've got a cake or some sweet treats if it's someone's birthday in a meeting. And some colleagues around the university do look at us sometimes as if they say, well, why are you doing that? They think they don't see the value of it. But we absolutely get the value back of that, because we can see how much it contributes to a good team ethic. Also, at the early stages, I think you tend to develop your style. And I think sometimes that's about trying things out. You take the initiative. You might follow examples that you see from colleagues around you. Certainly that first management job that I did outside of education, I had 3 other managers around me, and I just used to joke that they were the person that I never wanted to be, the person that I didn't understand how to be, and the one person who absolutely, that was a management style that I was working on. It was 3 really different types of people. So being surrounded by people who you might want to mimic their practices is often really important when you have an early career. And I think it's often as well, sometimes you are stepping into roles where you can't tell people to do things, either because that's not the culture that you work in, or you don't have that line management authority over them. So you're having to influence people through skills of persuasion and selling your vision and getting people to agree with your ideas. And that takes some time to be good at that, I think. That's something that you definitely need to work on. And your skills in that are really important. So how you talk about your ideas, how you communicate in writing, in meetings, in one-to-ones, and how you collaborate. And being open enough to have some self-awareness about how you come across, and to reflect on those interactions at the beginning of your career. Because often at that stage, what you're focusing on, as I said, is proving yourself in that role. So you want to prove that you can be trusted, that you're reliable, that you can show some initiative, particularly if you want to continue in your leadership journey, so that you can have potential in what you're doing there. Really interesting comment in the chat about spending informal time together, and a query about whether it can undermine leaders' status. And I think it is something interesting that I think perhaps differs depending on the culture in which you work within your own environment and where you are. So I think we always used to, you would recognise that there are times, perhaps in the working day, I think that feels like team bonding, team building. If we were, for example, to go out and share some perhaps more informal or social time together as a team after work, I think it's much more, the expectation is often that the leader or the manager is there to welcome everybody, to check everybody's okay, and then you leave and you let them have their bonding time together. And that's as much about helping people enjoy their informal time without feeling like their manager or leader is there. But it is an interesting thing about how we balance that with the authenticity of who you are. So thank you for that. That's a really interesting comment. Okay, let's move on and think about our mid-career leadership. And often this is a stage where capacity becomes critical, normally because you're starting to have a bit of a reputation for becoming quite capable. So your workload can go up quite significantly. You can be given more responsibility and more tasks, and you're balancing doing your own work and achieving your own goals with supervising and supporting and leading teams to develop their own work and achieve their goals. So a critical part of this phase is to recognise that it's not necessary to always do the work yourself, but a really big, important part of your job is to inspire other people to do things. That's not always easy, and we've got some experience of that in our team. So here, really, the development starts to become about your position. So you're starting to settle into your role as a leader, where the collective success of the team is as or more important than individual success. It's something that is something that you often develop as you settle into and are more comfortable. You feel that you've proven yourself. So now it's about what can that team that you lead achieve. Then it's really about starting to think about you as a leader, how you expand your style to try different things. Often in early stages of our leadership, we might have been on a course or learned some development. We've learned some techniques and tactics, and they serve us well for a time being. And then we hit a point where we think, okay, we're not getting what we thought we need, or we might have a member of staff who doesn't respond to what we've done previously, or we feel confident to work with our staff in a different way. And often here, this is where we start to learn much more coaching styles and think about maybe mentoring people outside our team, sharing that expertise, and working really hard on developing our staff so that we can delegate confidently to them. I think certainly that's something that I've struggled with over the years. We joke that I'm a control enthusiast. I do very much like knowing what's happening and who's doing what, and that it's going to be delivered on time. And it's taken me a long time to develop the trust in other people to set the task and say, okay, it's fine, I trust you, make the decisions, you do it. And even when you're watching from a distance thinking, that's not going to happen, or indeed for me, that's not going to happen in the way I would do it.
Exactly.
See, that's my manager that knows me better than me. I think that's something that's been a really good area of development for me over the years. And I think
I think Dr. Kung may
Minh.
have something to share with us. Yeah, because he has a lot of experience in the Vietnamese culture. So I do believe that, there was something he can share with us. So Dr. Kung, can you say something? I can see a lot of your idea in the chat box.
Yeah, please do.
Hello?
Excuse me, can you repeat the question because I was disconnected?
Oh, I just said that you may have a different view to share with us because what Professor Sarah shares here is her experience in UK. Maybe you can share your experience in Vietnamese culture. Yes, I can see a lot of your idea in the chat box.
Thank you very much for the information so far. And from the information you provided, I believe that I am one of the mid-career leaders because I have been in a leadership role for nearly 10 years. And I think like the information you share is quite similar to the context in Vietnam because in leadership role, we have to care much about building trust among our subordinates and as a role model, as ourselves as a role model as well, because we need to be disciplined with our work. We need to be effective and efficient in the way we organize work, so that we can oversee other people's activities. Because as leaders, if we do not perform well, if we have poor performance, then how can we lead people? How can we persuade people to maintain their work effectiveness and efficiency? And I think as leader, we need to keep observing the people around us, our peer, our subordinate, but at the same time also the peer leaders within our organization, and also we look at the role models from other institution or organization, from the literature, from the mass media, so that we can build up our leadership style. And I think as a leader, we ourselves need to choose a leadership style for ourselves. Because we have a very clear understanding of the work ethos of our workplace. So we need to think about an adaptive style that best works for our own context. And I believe that together with the skill that we have built up so far, we have to think about how to deepen our skills that you mentioned on the slide, right? In terms of resolving conflicts, in terms of giving feedback, and I have learned a lot from the incidents that I had so far through my leadership career. Yeah, and I think the team morale is also very important because we also keep motivating our staff, but at the same time we need to seek motivation for ourselves, right? So what I like about my workplace is that people are very supportive and cooperative, right? And we usually have lunch together. As I mentioned, the distant issue, but I think that when we spend informal time together, it is easier for us to it is easier for our subordinate to approach us when they have any issue. And when we lead people, it means that we need to look into their life. We need to see what kind of personal problem they have. For example, they have problem with their family, they have problems with their students, and sometimes it's hard for them to share with us if we keep a distance from the fellow faculty. So I think we need to be approachable, but at the same time we need to maintain our roles as leaders, right? So that we can there's something that they can learn from us, but at the same time there's something that they feel respectful about us as well. So I think this is a very great opportunity for me to revisit what I've been doing so far and learn new things from your sharing as well. Thank you.
Oh, it's so great to hear. Thank you. I think we are very aware on this project actually of the differences. It's been one of the blessings of this project for us to learn much more about what the cultures are like in the Vietnamese universities that we've visited on the project and worked with. And I think we also have to recognise that that there are massive differences in cultures within UK universities. I think there is certainly a trend for leaders to be considered to be more accessible and more to have more informal and casual interactions with their staff, even the most senior leaders of the organisations. It's probably not true in every university, but I would say it's a general direction of travel. I would say that our organisations are perhaps a little less associated with hierarchy and automatic respect of hierarchy than we noticed when we were in Vietnam. And I think that's a really interesting contrast for us to see the differences. And so we're really clear that we're sharing some of our examples, but it's critical that you consider them in your own context and thinking about what you want to do. The thing that always stays in our mind from when we came out to do our workshops, we asked people to do an activity thinking about a leader that they admire. And we were amazed that about 3/4 of the people in the room, all 3 times we did it, wrote about a manager that they had at work. And that just would not happen in the UK.
No.
Not at all. It would be either might be a very senior leader associated with their subject or their discipline, or perhaps a senior leader in their organisation, but it would be much more likely to be someone maybe from external popular media, that kind of thing. So it was a great learning experience for us to understand how important that vision and that hierarchy is in leadership.
You want to add just a couple more things, if you want to do that, and then we'll move on to later stage career leadership.
Please do.
Now that you mentioned workplace hierarchy, so I just want to mention the context in our institution, because our university is a private institution, so it's quite different from public university in Vietnam. So as a private institution, we place our service at the forefront, right? So the top priority is offering service to students. And in order to do this well, we need to coordinate work with other bodies within our institution. So it is less hierarchical than in public university in Vietnam. Because it is kind of horizontal because we have to collaborate with leaders in other faculties and even staff in other bodies of the university. So we are more horizontal than in a public university in Vietnam, where the norm is there are always like hierarchy that exists in public institution.
Yeah,
and
that's very interesting.
I think it is changing. The situation is changing in Vietnam because university have become more autonomous in terms of finance, and they're considering, they're trying to prioritize offering service to students. So things are changing in the context of Vietnam.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's actually a really nice link to later stage in careers. And when we think about the most senior people or the most senior leadership that we get in our organisation, often some of the conversations we have with our very senior leaders connect with that you were just talking about, Kwong, because they do a lot of partnership and international work on behalf of the university. So being seen as a senior leader, taking the time to travel and to engage with other senior leaders from organisations in other countries where the culture in higher education is different and might have a very strong focus on hierarchy or the importance of bringing in government to conversations. That's certainly not what happens here in the UK. Government is not associated very closely with day-to-day work in universities, and often it can be quite an oppositional or antagonistic relationship, as universities are much more independent. So it's a really good learning opportunity. So when we're in the later stages of our career, we have to be thinking often about either work across an institution or beyond an institution. So if we're thinking about our very most senior leaders, they're thinking about how their university fits in their country, but also how it fits in a global context with others that we want to work with. So the scope of our work changes massively at those later stages. So we're very privileged in our team here. I don't know if we would describe ourselves as later careers, maybe in terms of time-wise, but we have influence across multiple teams and we work across lots of partners. And we've been very fortunate enough to be involved in helping to shape things like the mission and vision and the new university strategy. We're not the most senior leaders responsible for deciding it, but we've had a really positive influence on that as we move forwards. There, your style might shift. And I think one of the things in later careers is that constant balance between remaining your authentic self, but shifting your style to suit the occasion that you're in that setting. So that instinctively, I'm not a terribly formal person, but I know now that I sometimes step into spaces where I do need to be more formal than I might be, for example, when I'm working with my team or in my department. Because that style is really important, because often at the later stage, your real focus in your leadership is to get people to change, to move things on, to transform an organisation. So you need to lean into what will be the thing that will help move the culture or give you the right systems, change the direction, and really represent your organisation well. And your skills at this point, whilst your experience and the things that you're working on might become less specialist in terms of their scope, your skills might become more specialist at this point. So here you might be thinking about learning a lot more about strategy and objective setting, about change management. For me, it's been a lot about partnership management at this stage. I'm doing a lot more work with partners across the university. And as we talked about earlier, that decision-making and stepping into that crisis leadership space often becomes something more important for you. And I do think there is an element of determining the legacy and how you want to leave somewhere better than you found it. So what are the permanent shifts in practice or culture that you want there to be as a result of the work that you're doing? And that's something that I think we probably had more conversations about that recently than in our early stages of working together.
And it's an interesting thing, isn't it? Because I don't think it's about it's not about the person. It's not about, oh, that's the impact that, as Sarah mentioned, Mary Watson, our BVC's lead. You wouldn't say, oh, Mary initiated that, or Mary did that. It's not about the person. It's about the change that she has enabled. So we might say the structure in the university is much better now, recognizing that she was the person that led that, or the strategy is appropriate, she led the strategy, but you don't say, oh, Mary did that. So it's not, I kind of want to remove the egotistic element away from that, but it is thinking about how has the work that you have done with your team enabled that longer term change and that effect.
We might return to that in February. We're going to do our workshop on career development. And there are times when you absolutely do want to ascribe those changes to work that you've led. But actually on a more permanent legacy basis, often people remember the change that's been made, but don't necessarily associate it with the person that's made it. Just a word on imposter syndrome, because we did mention it earlier, and it is something that has been a really central part to particularly women's leadership development here in Western Europe and North America for a long time. I think it's now starting to be something that is understood, that it's not just about women, but it came from research about how particularly high achieving women were still reporting a lack of self-confidence, and that they were much more likely to not claim their accomplishments, that to either doubt how good they were or to claim that they were a team effort, part of the group. So much less likely than men to say, I led that, I did that success is because of my leadership. So the literature now is talking a bit more about it in a more general sense, but it can be something that people want to explore in their leadership development. So that might be something that applies to you. It might be something to some early career leaders that you lead, and that you might want to say to people, actually, it's really important to think about having a growth mindset, is the expression. So it's not about being perfect at everything at all times. It's about saying, do you know what? I don't know how to do this thing. This is an opportunity for me to learn. I will stretch and challenge myself, and I will grow as a consequence of it. I might get some wins. I might not get the win, but that will be an opportunity to learn how to do things differently. So that's something we would like.
And I think as a leader, and particularly as a manager, when you're line managing people, recognizing that members in your team, all members at some point will feel an imposter syndrome. They feel, oh, I can't do that, or I shouldn't. I'm not the right person to be doing that. I don't know why they've asked me to do it, and feeling like that I'm a fraud in this activity. But as the manager, your responsibility is to again talk to them about why they're the right person in that role, why you know their strengths, why it is a challenge that the role they're going to do or the activity they're going to do. Oh, someone's drawing on our screen. I'm going to ask if we can clear the screen. Let me see if I can do that.
So it's a really important part of, in our management context, to recognise when people are talking about a confidence or a lack of confidence in order to do something, that a big part of being a good leader and getting the most out of your team and the people that you work with is to be clear that you're talking to them about why their skills and experiences to that point have enabled them to do the thing that you're asking them to do, that you're challenging them to do, and that they have your support in terms of what they will progress through. As I say, sometimes they might get the win, they might do absolutely what it is that you're looking for, and sometimes it might not go well, and you might have to say to people, okay, well, let's talk about why that didn't work. We might say, what have we learned from that? And okay, if we're going to do it differently next time. And I think that's one of the things that I would value most in the leaders that I've worked for, have been the kind of the trust to try things. And when they don't necessarily end up as we'd intended, to say, okay, well, how do we get a different result next time? And that being a really confident conversation. Staff development can play a really important part in helping with imposter syndrome, because It's something that sometimes is a technical thing, or sometimes you need some space to work on a particular mindset or skills. So I'm going to pass back to Helen, who's going to talk a little bit about different types of staff development that she's done at the different stages of her career.
Thank you, Sarah. Sorry for losing my train of thought while I was dealing with the annotation on the screen. So, as Sarah mentioned, we think about staff development at different times and the different types of staff development we might engage in. Now, some of you saw the top part of this diagram when we came and did workshops in Vietnam. This was our kind of career timelines, but we've changed the bottom bits for both of our timelines to really try and identify what staff development we did at different parts in our roles during work in higher education. So when I started as a lecturer back in 2001, I was a module leader. So my leadership was at the module level, working with students, really leading students. And part of my development was very much about being able to do the job. So did my virtual learning environment training, understanding how I could learn from other people's teaching by doing some peer observation, going to the Learning and Teaching Conference to learn a little bit more about my teaching skills. So that was very much practical development to help me do the job that I was going to be as a lecturer. Later on then, as I thought, I'm enjoying this learning and teaching activity, that might be a route I want to go into. I attended more learning and teaching events, more international conferences associated with learning and teaching. And actually, I started organising some events. So again, that was part of my leadership work, but also as a staff development activity to planning and organising. In 2008, I became the Deputy Director of what was then the Learning and Teaching Innovation Centre. And that was the first time that I had a significant line management responsibility. So within that as well, I did my appraiser training to make sure I could work with my staff effectively, understand how to set objectives, help staff evaluate and reflect on their practice. And then also things like chairing exam boards, because I was in a leadership role within our area and within our department, as well as doing what we call the manager's essential guidance. So understanding what my responsibilities were as a line manager. And again, that real focus on how am I going to work with individuals within my team. Later on then, again, from probably about 2010 up to about 2015, I was then taking on different roles and again, working across an institution and thinking about that leadership and really having a leadership without authority in certain ways, because I was trying to influence activity across the university. And one of the really useful things that I did during that period was an external leadership course. So I did some external leadership training and I did a governance training because I sat on a board of governors. So to understand governance responsibilities as well as leadership responsibilities. And part of that training was to have what we call 360-degree feedback. And that was a really useful learning experience where members of the team who you directly line manage provide anonymous feedback, but also people who you report up to provide feedback, and also people who are on the same level as you, but work in other parts of the university provide feedback. So you get this 360-degree feedback on your leadership and on your management. And that was a really important part of my own reflection on how I'm doing the job, what my skills are, what my expertise are, and the gaps that I needed to work on. Again, as we progress through later stages of my career, again, roles working across the institution, but also understanding more about the sector, we've had to do things like apply for the Teaching Excellence Framework. That's writing a big document that's a regulatory requirement, understanding what our Office for Students as a regulator requires from us within the university. So again, some of the training that I've done there has been about those specific activities. So guidance from the Office for Students or going to specific external training on projects that I'm leading. Importantly, within that, there's been quite a lot about race equity and understanding people's experiences from different backgrounds, and that EDI work or equality, diversity and inclusivity work, that's been really important for me in my own development. Also as well, alongside all of that, There's the regular training that you need to do that might not be very glamorous, but it's really important. So that might be, we would call it GDPR training, but data protection training, cybersecurity training, health and safety management. And again, as a leader, as a manager, that is your responsibility. You are accountable in those situations. And then right at the end of my list there is that emergency planning, and in being involved in understanding crisis management as one of a senior leader.
Definitely. I think there's a question in the chat about advice for those who aspire to become leaders. And I think one of the interesting things about 360-degree feedback is that it gives you an opportunity to see how others perceive you. Because often we spend a lot of time with our peers, with our direct managers, or with our own teams. But of course, generally speaking, they are not the people who appoint you to the next role. That those are different groups of people. And so I think helping to think about how you are perceived by the more senior managers can help you to think about how you might become a leader in that sense. I'm going to slightly duck the question, though, and encourage you to join the workshop in February, because we are going to talk in the career development session about just that. So hopefully that will be something that we can go into in a bit more detail. My timeline is not dissimilar to Helen's, except for I've tried to focus on things that have helped me when I have shifted roles. So I've probably job hopped a bit more than Helen has. Definitely. I've done many more different but not unrelated roles within the university. I joke that I've been here a long time, but I think I'm on 21 years and I'm on job number 8 possibly within that. So I've had lots of different roles. So for me, I thought it was useful in here to highlight the specific staff development that I've done to help me tackle a job that I'm new to, that kind of thing that is perhaps that could feed imposter syndrome, the thing that I'm worried about that I haven't actually done. So very much at the beginning for me, my first job in higher education was as a research assistant. And so I was obsessed with not being as good at research as the other people I was surrounded by. So I did lots of research methods training. I also didn't have a lot of confidence in my ability to write for publication. So I focused a lot on that. That was about confidence building. If I'm thinking here, the green boxes are the sort of official qualifications that I've done along the way, and not so many. And I think we often have conversations about, well, is there something else to do? But I do think it is a challenge when you're in a mid-career. We talked earlier about the fact that you can be challenged with your capacity in that setting, or finding the time to do those kinds of things can be difficult. And I find it much easier to engage in staff development that is immediately useful for me, that I can immediately see the value of it. That's something for me to reflect on as I go forwards. The blue boxes at the top are external roles to the university that I've taken on. And a lot of my staff development has come through doing that. So when I first became a trustee of an external organisation, I had to learn a lot about events management and risk assessment because I was responsible for helping run conferences. Later on, when I became chair of the board, I had finance budget training that was provided by an organisation in the UK called the Charity Commission, because I was a charity trustee in that space. So I think it's been interesting for me to reflect on what I've done for external roles, not just internal roles in the university. Like Helen, I've had a long-standing interest in equality impacts, but I've also stepped into spaces where I really did not fit neatly when I started. So in 2016, I stepped in as our Associate Dean, Learning and Teaching in our School of Engineering. I am not an engineer, let me be clear about, and they realised I was not an engineer, but it was a learning and teaching role, and it was a school that was, as I say, in a little bit of a negative space at the time. They'd had a collection of poor student feedback. There was quite a high culture of making complaints because people didn't want to have difficult conversations or to resolve issues earlier on. And this was the setting in which I was told that I had to go in and pull everybody into line. And I was like, no, that's not how this is going to work. I am going to open my office door. I'm going to set up a table where we can have a conversation. I'm going to offer everyone who steps into my office a hot drink, and we're going to be much more positive about what we talk about in that space. But I did absolutely recognise that I needed to learn quickly about engineering as a discipline. So I did a lot of external networking with the engineering sector to make sure that I had a credible voice in that sector, that my expertise and specialist knowledge could be transferred to that discipline. And equally, the job that I stepped into after that was about delivering a completely new qualification to the English university setting. Our apprenticeships were relaunched across the sector, and nobody had done them before. They were completely new. And again, a really good opportunity to say, well, actually, I think I've got some experience that would be useful here, but this is brand new. None of us know what we're doing in this space. So a really intense learning period of learning. More latterly, in the last sort of 2 years, when I've been in the role that I'm in now, it's been about networking with other people who do similar roles to me through something called the Heads of Educational Developers Group, and also through the University Alliance Group, which is what we would refer to as a mission group. It's a collection of similar public universities in the UK who have similar types of course portfolios and challenges and interests in the same thing. And those professional networks have been really important to me. And then recently, it coinciding with this project, it's been about having a reciprocal mentoring relationship with someone from an alliance university, and also being a mentor myself to somebody who's on a leadership program. And that's something that's been very rewarding from my own development perspective and made me think a lot about what I'm doing.
Sarah? So really, we want to conclude our workshop with some self-reflections for you, really. So thinking about, in what ways do you lead people? What are your leadership styles? What are your approaches? And how has that developed over time? Or how do you think it might develop over time for those of you at early leadership career stages? And thinking about what is missing from your skills for that next leadership role. So where do you want to go to next? What skills do you want to develop? And can you think about the staff development that you could start doing now to give you that experience ready to apply for that role? And what will you say, what will stay the same for your leadership? So what is working well for you at the moment that you'll take into your next stage, but where are the areas as well that you want to develop? So really having that strategic approach for yourself of your own development to enable you to progress in your leadership career.
Yeah, I think if you're in that early phase and thinking about those first steps, or in that mid-career phase, it's really easy to get caught up in the day-to-day practice of your team and what your team are doing, what you want from them, and not think about your own development. So I think our final slide on is one that if you are thinking about your own development, what might that commitment be? So what is the next step for you? We might offer you an easy suggestion if you've not signed up for the massive open online course. That's a nice, easy next step for you. It might be to set up a mentoring relationship. It might be to have lunch with somebody whose leadership skills you admire. It might be to read one of those leadership books or watch a TED talk from the kinds of people who you admire.
360-degree feedback. I think that is, that's useful at any stage, but particularly if you're thinking about what is your next step into a senior leadership.
Yeah.
There are lots of ways that you can do that. There are lots of online tools to enable that 360-degree leadership, but it's certainly worth thinking about to get that feedback.
Definitely. I think some of those things have been really useful to us. We're approaching the end of our time together this morning, so we'll leave this up. And if people do want to make a commitment, feel free. I appreciate that for some of you, you need to go away and think about that. But we really hope that you can join us for our next sessions. We do actually have a session in January on mentoring and people's experiences of mentoring, when we're also hoping to be joined by colleagues from a UK organisation called the Vietnamese Intellectual Society, who talk about how they use mentoring to support colleagues in that space. So we'll be thrilled to have colleagues there. And as I say, then we have our career development session in February, where I'm hoping to be joined by colleagues who lead our career development provision here at our university, including the people who lead that provision, but also a senior leader in that space as well. And I'm hoping she'll share a little bit about her own journey in that space, because I think it's been a really interesting one as well. So
thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for all your thoughts and insights, both within Menti and within the chat. It's been lovely to be with you today. We have our Christmas break coming up soon. Nung was telling us that there are lots of Christmas trees out and about and decorations in Vietnam. So enjoy the festivities from your perspective, and we will certainly enjoy them from ours. So all good wishes, and we'll see you in the new year.
Yeah, thank you so much for holding the workshop today. Yeah, Happy New Year. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. Bye.
Thank you.
thank
Merry
you
Christmas.
so much. Take care now.
Thank you. Merry Christmas.